Poor husband asks billionaire, "Why is my wife's photo in your mansion?" Then the unbelievable. The silver-framed photograph on the mahogany desk stopped me cold. My delivery package nearly slipped from my fingers as I stared at the image of a teenage girl with unmistakable eyes and the small scar above her left eyebrow. It was my wife, my Maria, sitting prominently displayed in billionaire Victor Ashford's private study. Hey, beautiful people. Welcome to today's incredible story. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This story has twists you won't believe. Hit that subscribe button now. Just set it on the side table there, Victor Ashford said as he entered, barely glancing at me. The tech billionaire moved with the casual confidence of a man worth billions, his silver hair perfectly styled, his casual sweater probably costing more than my monthly rent. I placed the rare book collection down with trembling hands, but couldn't tear my eyes from the photograph. Maria had never mentioned knowing anyone wealthy. We'd been married 6 years, and I thought I knew everything about her, from her difficult childhood in foster care to her quiet job as a bookkeeper. Nothing in our modest Queens apartment life suggested any connection to this mansion on Long Island's Gold Coast. Is there a problem? Victor's tone carried an edge of impatience. That photo, I heard myself say, pointing to the silver frame. The woman in it. Where did you get it? Victor's expression shifted subtly. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps recognition. That's personal, he said coldly. Why do you ask? Because that's my wife. The words hung in the air between us, and in that moment, I had no idea that this delivery route I'd taken as a favor to a sick colleague would unravel secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I loved. Victor stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, picked up the frame, and studied it as if seeing it for the first time in years. Your wife, he repeated slowly. What's her name? Maria. Maria Gormley. She was Maria Rodriguez before we married. Victor set the frame down carefully. I think you should leave. Not until you tell me why you have her photo. I don't owe you any explanations. You're here to deliver a package, nothing more. Victor pulled out his phone. If you don't leave immediately, I'll call security. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but I recognized the futility. Men like Victor Ashford didn't explain themselves to people like me, a 32-year-old delivery driver making $45,000 a year. I grabbed my tablet, got his scrolled signature, and left. But as I drove my truck back toward the city, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. How did Victor Ashford know Maria? When had that photo been taken? The frame looked expensive, antique, even the kind of thing you'd use for someone important to you. Not a casual acquaintance, not a former employee. Maria was working late when I got home that evening. I sat in our small living room, the television playing to an empty room, and tried to piece together a puzzle I didn't understand. Maria had always been somewhat mysterious about her past. She'd been adopted at 17 after spending most of her childhood in foster care. Her adoptive parents, the Rodriguezes, were good people who'd passed away in a car accident 4 years ago. Maria rarely talked about her time before the adoption. She'd always said it was too painful, too complicated. I'd respected that. Everyone had parts of their past they didn't want to examine too closely. But now that silence felt different. Suspicious. When Maria finally came home around 9 p.m., I was still sitting in the same spot, my delivery uniform still on. She kissed the top of my head, tired but smiling. Long day, she asked, heading to the kitchen. You could say that. I followed her. Maria, do you know a man named Victor Ashford? I watched her face carefully, looking for a tell, a flash of recognition, guilt, anything. But Maria just looked confused as she poured a glass of water. Victor Ashford, the tech guy? I mean, I know who he is from the news, but I don't know him personally. Why? She seemed genuinely puzzled. I wanted to believe her, but I'd seen that photo. I delivered a package to his house today. He had a photograph of you on his desk. Maria's glass stopped halfway to her lips. What? That doesn't make any sense. That's what I thought. But it was definitely you. Younger, maybe 16 or 17, but unmistakably you. That's impossible. I've never even met the man. but something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, confusion, maybe even worry. Are you sure it was me? The scar above your eyebrow, your eyes. I'd know you anywhere, Maria. She set down the glass and pulled out her phone. After a few moments of searching, she showed me the screen, a recent photo of Victor Ashford at some charity gala. This is him. I nodded. Maria stared at the photo for a long moment. I've never seen him before in my life, she said quietly. I swear to you, Harris. I don't know why he'd have my picture. I wanted to believe her. In 6 years of marriage, Maria had never given me reason to doubt her. But the evidence was right there, unexplained and unsettling. Over the next week, I couldn't let it go. I started paying attention to things I'd previously overlooked. Maria's phone habits. Her schedule. The occasional expensive item that appeared in our apartment. A designer handbag she'd claimed was a gift from a work colleague. A necklace she said she'd found at a thrift store. I'd never questioned these things before. Now they felt like red flags. I hated myself for the suspicion. Hated the way I caught myself checking her phone when she was in the shower, scrolling through messages I had no right to read. But I found nothing incriminating, just normal conversations with coworkers and friends. Nothing about Victor Ashford, nothing secret or hidden. Then on a Saturday in early December, everything changed again. I was grabbing coffee from our usual spot, a small cafe 3 blocks from our apartment, when I saw them. Maria and a man I didn't recognize sitting at a corner table. They weren't touching, weren't doing anything obviously inappropriate, but there was an intimacy to their conversation that made my stomach drop. The man was well-dressed, expensive suit, polished shoes. He slid a manila envelope across the table to Maria. I ducked behind a newspaper rack, my heart pounding. I watched as Maria opened the envelope, pulled out what looked like documents, and read through them. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked shocked, maybe even scared. The man reached across and squeezed her hand, said something I couldn't hear from my hiding spot. Maria nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I left before they could see me. I walked home in a daze, my coffee forgotten. What had I just witnessed? Who was that man? What was in that envelope? When Maria came home 2 hours later, she was quiet, distant. She claimed she'd been shopping, but she had no bags, no purchases to show for her time out. Everything okay? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, fine. Just tired. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, I lay awake long after Maria had fallen asleep. The pieces didn't fit together, but they formed a picture I didn't want to see. A wealthy billionaire with her photo. Secret meetings with well-dressed men. Expensive gifts with vague explanations. Maria's mysterious past that she never wanted to discuss. I'd grown up working class in Brooklyn. My parents ran a small dry cleaning business, working 70-hour weeks to keep me fed and in decent schools. I'd learned young that the world wasn't fair, that people like me had to work twice as hard for half as much. But I'd also learned to trust my instincts. And right now, every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. The following Monday, I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I called in sick to work and drove back out to the Ashford estate. I didn't have a plan exactly, just a desperate need for answers that was eating me alive from the inside. I parked down the street, trying to figure out my next move, when I saw a Mercedes sedan pull through the gates. Through my windshield, I could make out the driver, the same well-dressed man from the cafe, the man who'd given Maria that envelope. My hands clenched on the steering wheel. Whatever was happening, it involved Victor Ashford, that mysterious man, and my wife, and I was going to find out what it was, even if the truth destroyed me. 3 days later, my resolve hardened into action. I'd done research, digging into Victor Ashford's background with the obsessive focus of a man trying to save his marriage. Ashford had made his billions in software security in the early 2000s, then diversified into real estate and venture capital. Divorced twice, no children according to public records. Philanthropist, political donor. Nothing that explained his connection to Maria. I'd also tracked the mysterious man from the cafe. It took some work, but I'd followed him from another meeting with Maria. Yes, there had been another meeting I'd surveilled from across the street to a downtown office building. The directory listed him as James Mercer, a attorney at law. Not just any attorney, he specialized in estate planning and family law for high-net-worth clients. The pieces still didn't fit into anything that made sense, but they all pointed back to Victor Ashford. Maria had been acting stranger by the day. More distracted, more secretive. She'd started taking calls in the other room, her voice low and urgent. When I asked about it, she claimed it was work stress. But Maria had never been a good liar, and I could see the weight of whatever secret she was carrying in the tightness around her eyes, the way she startled when I entered a room unexpectedly. On Thursday evening, I made a decision. I found Victor Ashford's private office address, not the mansion, but his business headquarters in Manhattan. The next morning, I called in sick again and took the train into the city. The building was one of those glass towers in Midtown, all steel and modern art in the lobby. I felt out of place in my regular jeans and jacket, surrounded by people in $1,000 suits. But I made it past security with a lie about having a delivery, then found my way to the 42nd floor where Ashford Capital Management occupied half the level. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, smiled professionally. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to speak with Mr. Ashford. It's urgent. Personal. I'm afraid Mr. Ashford doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Tell him it's about Maria Rodriguez. Tell him the delivery driver from last month needs 5 minutes of his time." The receptionist's expression flickered. She picked up her phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then looked at me with new interest. "Mr. Ashford will see you. But you have 10 minutes, not 5. I was ushered through a maze of glass-walled offices to a corner suite with sweeping views of Central Park. Victor Ashford stood by the window, his back to the door. When he turned, his expression was guarded. "Mr. Gormley, I wondered if you'd show up here eventually. You know my name." "I know a great many things, Mr. Gormley. Sit. We have matters to discuss." Victor gestured to a leather chair, then settled behind his desk. That same silver-framed photograph sat in the corner, Maria's young face smiling out at them both. "You want to know about that picture?" "I want to know what you're doing with my wife." "I'm not doing anything with your wife." Victor's tone was measured, careful. "Though I understand why you'd think otherwise given the circumstances." "Then explain the circumstances. Explain why you have her photo. Explain the secret meetings with lawyers. Explain why my wife has been lying to me for weeks." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Victor studied me for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the desk. "Before you look at that, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but it's the truth. And I have the documentation to prove it." I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, old ones from what looked like the 1980s or early 90s. A young couple with a small child. The woman had Maria's eyes. The man had her smile. 25 years ago, Victor said quietly, "My younger brother and his wife died in a house fire. Their daughter was never found. The authorities assumed she'd perished in the blaze, but no remains were ever recovered." The case went cold. I looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that 2 months ago, I hired a private investigator to take one more look at that cold case. 25 years is a long time, but new forensic techniques, new databases. I wanted closure. What I found instead was evidence that my niece didn't die in that fire. She was taken." The room felt like it was tilting. I gripped the edge of the desk. "That photo on my desk," Victor continued, "was taken 6 months after my brother's death by a security camera at a bus station in Newark. A man was traveling with a girl matching my niece's description. The police at the time couldn't identify them, couldn't track them. But with modern facial recognition software, my investigator was able to trace that girl through various foster care records under different names. She was moved around constantly, her identity changed multiple times, until finally at age 17, she was adopted by a couple named Rodriguez in Queens." "No," I whispered. But even as I said it, pieces were falling into place. Maria's mysterious past. Her lack of family. The way she'd always said her early childhood was too painful to remember. "I had DNA analysis done," Victor said gently. "From Maria's medical records. Nothing invasive or illegal. Just samples from routine blood work that medical labs keep on file. The match is conclusive. Maria Rodriguez, your wife, is Sarah Ashford, my brother's daughter. My niece. I couldn't breathe. Does she know? Not yet. I wanted to be absolutely certain before approaching her. I wanted to understand her life, make sure that revealing this information wouldn't cause more harm than good. Victor's expression softened. I've been having her followed, Mr. Gormley. Not to spy, but to protect her and to understand who she'd become. That's why I know about you, about your marriage, about the life you've built together. The lawyer I managed. James Mercer is preparing the documentation for when I finally tell her. There's a substantial trust fund, money her father left behind, money that's been growing for 25 years. There are properties, investments. None of that matters compared to the truth she deserves to know about her identity. My mind was reeling. Maria wasn't having an affair. She wasn't betraying me. She was caught in the middle of something she didn't even know about yet. A past that had been stolen from her, a family she'd never known she had. Why didn't you just tell her? I asked. Because telling someone their entire childhood was a lie. That they were kidnapped and had their identity erased. That they have an uncle they never knew existed. That's not a conversation you rush into. I needed to be sure. I needed to be prepared to support her through whatever came next. Victor's voice carried genuine pain. I lost my brother and his wife. I thought I'd lost Sarah too. Finding out she's alive, that she's been living just a few miles away all this time, it's a miracle and a tragedy all at once. Someone took her, I said, the implications sinking in. Someone deliberately separated her from her family. Yes, and I intend to find out who and why. Victor's expression hardened. But first, Maria needs to know the truth, and I think that conversation needs to happen with you there. She'll need you, Mr. Gormley. This is going to turn her world upside down. I looked down at the photographs in the folder. A little girl who would grow up to be my wife. A brother who would never see his daughter again. A family destroyed by fire and secrets. My hands were shaking. When? I asked. Tomorrow, if you're willing. James Mercer will be there with all the legal documentation. I have medical records, DNA results, everything she'll need to verify what I'm telling her. Victor paused. I know this isn't what you expected when you came here today. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I thought you were having an affair with my wife. I know. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but I had to be certain. 25 years of wondering if she was alive. I couldn't risk being wrong. Victor stood, moved to the window. Your wife is my family, Mr. Gormley. The only family I have left. I'm not trying to take her from you or disrupt your life. I just want the chance to know her, to give her back the truth that was stolen from her. I didn't know what to say. The anger and suspicion that had been eating me alive for weeks suddenly had nowhere to go. In their place was an overwhelming sense of the strangeness of life, the random chances and terrible tragedies that shape people's paths without them ever knowing. She's going to need time, I said finally. This is going to be a lot. I know, and I'll give her all the time she needs. But she deserves to know who she really is, who her parents were, what was taken from her. We sat in silence for a moment. Two men bound together by their love for the same woman, one as a husband, one as the uncle she'd never known she had. I closed the folder and stood. Tomorrow then, but I want to be the one to tell her you want to meet. She trusts me. This needs to come from me first. Victor nodded. Of course. Whatever makes this easier for her. As I left the office, my mind spun with everything I'd learned. I needed to tell Maria, needed to prepare her for what was coming. But how did you tell someone their entire life was built on a lie? How did you explain that the family she'd lost had actually been stolen from her? I drove home in a fog, my mind struggling to process everything Victor Ashford had told me. Sarah Ashford. My wife had been someone else entirely before she became Maria Rodriguez. Kidnapped at age 4. Her identity erased. Her entire childhood stolen. How did you even begin to explain something like that? When I walked into our apartment, Maria was cooking dinner. The normality of it, her humming along to music, the smell of garlic and tomatoes, the life we'd built together felt both precious and fragile. In a few hours, everything would change. Hey, you, she said, smiling. How was your day? We need to talk. I set my keys down carefully, my hands still trembling slightly. Can you turn off the stove and sit down? The smile faded from Maria's face. Harris, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so. But something's happened, and I need you to listen to everything I have to say before you react. Okay. We sat at our small kitchen table, the same one where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together, where we'd paid bills and made plans and dreamed about our future. Maria's hand found mine across the scratched surface. I went to see Victor Ashford today, I began. I demanded to know why he had your photograph. Maria's eyes widened. Harris, what? Let me finish, please. I squeezed her hand. He told me something that sounds impossible, but he is proof. DNA evidence, photographs, medical records. Maria, your real name is Sarah Ashford. You're his niece. 25 years ago, you were taken from your family after your parents died in a fire. Someone kidnapped you and put you into foster care under a false identity. The color drained from Maria's face. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to form words. That's insane, she finally whispered. I was in foster care, but that's because my parents abandoned me. That's what they told me. I was found wandering alone when I was 4. No identification, no family looking for you, because someone made sure no one could find you. They changed your name, moved you between facilities, kept you hidden. I pulled out my phone, showed her the photos Victor had given me. This is your father, Victor's brother. This is your mother. Look at them, Maria. Really look. Maria took the phone with shaking hands. She stared at the photograph of the young couple with their small daughter. Tears started streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. I have dreams sometimes, she said softly. About a woman with dark hair who sang to me. About a house with a big backyard and a tire swing. I always thought they were just fantasies, things I'd made up because I wanted a family so badly. She looked up at me, her face anguished. Are you telling me those memories are real? Victor wants to meet with you tomorrow. He has everything, documents, DNA results, your family's history. He wants to give you back the truth about who you are. Maria stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. This is crazy. People don't just get kidnapped and have their whole identity erased. That doesn't happen in real life. It happened to you. I stood too, reaching for her. I know it's overwhelming, but Maria, you have family. Real family. An uncle who's been looking for you, who thought you were dead for 25 years. Why? Maria's voice cracked. Why would someone do this? Why would they take me? That's what we need to find out. Will you meet with Victor? Will you at least hear what he has to say? Maria wrapped her arms around herself, looking lost and young. I don't know if I can handle this. What if it's true? What if my whole life has been a lie? I pulled her into my arms, feeling her shake against me. Then we deal with it together, the same way we deal with everything. But you deserve to know the truth, Maria. You deserve to know who you really are. The next afternoon, we sat in James Mercer's office, a neutral space that felt less intimidating than Victor's corporate headquarters. The attorney was professional but kind, laying out documents on the conference table with careful precision. Victor sat across from us, his expression a mix of hope and nervousness that made him seem more human than the commanding billionaire I'd first encountered. Ms. Rodriguez, or Ms. Ashford, if you prefer, I want to start by saying how sorry I am, Victor began. Sorry for your loss. Sorry for the years you spent alone. Sorry for approaching this in a way that may have seemed secretive or frightening. Maria's hand found mine under the table, gripping tight. Just tell me what you know. For the next hour, Victor laid it all out. His brother Daniel and sister-in-law Catherine had died on March 15, 1999, when their house in Westchester burned down. Their daughter Sarah, age 4, was presumed dead. But no body was ever found, and the fire investigation had been oddly incomplete. I was living in California at the time, building my company, Victor explained, his voice heavy with old regret. I flew back for the funeral, tried to get answers, but the case went cold within months. I blame myself for not being there, for not pushing harder. James Mercer slid a DNA report across the table. This confirms with 99.9% certainty that you share approximately 25% of your DNA with Mr. Ashford, consistent with an avuncular relationship. You are Sarah Ashford. Maria stared at the document, her hands trembling. Who took me? Where have they been all this time? That's what I've spent the last 2 months trying to find out, Victor said. And 3 days ago, my investigator finally found the answer. It's not pleasant. He pulled out another file, this one thicker. Your parents' fire wasn't an accident. Daniel worked as a financial analyst for a private equity firm called Blackstone Ventures. In early 1999, he discovered that the firm's founder, Richard Voss, was running a massive Ponzi scheme. Millions of dollars stolen from investors, most of them retirees who trusted Voss with their life savings. I felt Maria tense beside me. My father knew about it? He was going to expose it. He compiled evidence, contacted the SEC, was planning to testify. But before he could, the fire happened. Victor's jaw tightened. Richard Voss's brother-in-law was a fire inspector. The investigation was deliberately botched. And Richard's sister, a woman named Margaret Foster, worked for the state's Child Protective Services. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They took her to keep her as leverage? That's my investigator's theory. With Sarah alive somewhere, Daniel's evidence might have seemed less credible. Grief-stricken brother making accusations, unable to even protect his own family. And if Daniel had left any additional documentation, any insurance policy, they'd need Sarah alive to access it. Victor looked at Maria with profound sadness. You weren't killed because you were more valuable alive. A ghost that could be controlled if needed. But they never needed me, Maria whispered. Because my father died before he could expose them. Yes. So you were simply discarded into the foster system under a false name. Moved around every year or two to keep you invisible. Margaret Foster had the connections to make it all work, to bury your real identity so deep that no one would ever find it. Maria stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to all of us. I could see her shoulders shaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I remember being scared. Being in a car with a woman who said my parents were gone, that I needed to be quiet and good or bad things would happen. I remember foster homes, different names, people telling me to forget who I was before. She turned, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was going crazy. I thought those memories were nightmares. They were real, Victor said gently. All of it was real, and I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. Where are they now? Maria's voice turned hard. Richard Voss and Margaret Foster. Where are the people who did this to me? James Mercer cleared his throat. That's complicated. Richard Voss's Ponzi scheme was eventually exposed in 2004 after the statute of limitations on the arson and kidnapping had passed in some jurisdictions. He served 8 years in federal prison for securities fraud, but was released in 2012. He's been living quietly in Connecticut ever since. Margaret Foster retired from child services in 2008. She's in her 70s now, living in Florida. They got away with it, Maria said flatly. They murdered my parents, kidnapped me, ruined my life, and they got away with it. Not necessarily, Victor said. New evidence, new testimony, new charges can still be filed. Murder has no statute of limitations, and now we have you. Proof that you survived, proof of what they did. I watched my wife's face transform. The shock and grief were still there, but underneath was something harder, something determined. I want them to pay, Maria said quietly. I want everyone to know what they did. Over the next 2 weeks, Maria threw herself into piecing together her stolen past. Victor opened his home to her, sharing photo albums and videos of her parents. She watched herself as a toddler, heard her father's laugh, saw her mother's smile. Each discovery was both a gift and a wound, glimpses of a life that had been ripped away. I watched her change. The woman I'd known, sweet, gentle Maria, who worked quietly as a bookkeeper and rarely made waves, was discovering a core of steel she'd never known she possessed. This was Sarah Ashford, daughter of a man who tried to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. Victor had offered her access to the trust fund, nearly $8 million accumulated over 25 years. Maria had looked at the number and felt nothing. Money couldn't buy back her childhood or bring back her parents, but it could fund something else: justice. I want to hire investigators, she told Victor and me one evening in late December. We sat in Victor's study, the same room where I had first seen her photograph. I want to find every piece of evidence that connects Voss and Foster to what happened. I want it airtight. The family attorney already has people looking into it, Victor said. But Maria, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we can't prove everything. It's been 25 years. Evidence degrades. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Then we find what we can and we make it count. Maria's voice was steady. These people took everything from me. They don't get to just live out their retirement in peace. I had never been prouder of her or more worried. Maria, this is going to be hard. Going up against people like that, reliving everything. I know, but I need to do this, Harris. I need them to know that Sarah Ashford didn't disappear. That they failed to erase me. She took my hand. I need you to understand why this matters. I do understand. And I'm with you. Whatever you need. What we needed, it turned out, was a small miracle, and we got it from an unexpected source. In mid-January, Victor's head investigator, a former FBI agent named Patricia Cole, requested an urgent meeting. She arrived at the apartment with a laptop and an expression I couldn't quite read. I found someone, Patricia said without preamble. Someone who worked for Richard Voss in 1999. His name is Dennis Hartley, and he's dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Maybe 3 months left. He's decided he wants to clear his conscience before he goes. Maria leaned forward. He knows something? He knows everything. He was Voss's right-hand man. Helped him run the Ponzi scheme. He was there the night they planned the fire. Patricia opened her laptop, turned it so we could see. He's willing to give a formal deposition. He'll testify to everything: the scheme, the murder, the kidnapping. He says he's lived with the guilt for 25 years, and he wants to make it right before he dies. I felt Maria's hand tighten in mine. Why no? Why come forward after all this time? He has grandchildren. Says he can't die knowing they might someday learn what he did and think he was a monster. He wants to do one decent thing before the end. Patricia's expression softened. I know it's not much of a redemption arc, but his testimony could be the key to everything. Within days, Dennis Hartley gave a videotaped deposition that laid out the entire conspiracy. He described how Richard Voss had panicked when Daniel Ashford discovered the fraud. How they'd planned to make it look like an accident. How Margaret Foster, Voss's sister, had suggested taking the child instead of killing her, leverage, insurance, a way to muddy the waters if Daniel had left behind evidence. We told ourselves we were saving her, Hartley said on the tape, his voice weak and raspy. That she'd have a better life than being orphaned. But the truth is, we were monsters. We took that little girl and threw her into the system like she was garbage. And Sarah's parents, Daniel and Catherine, were good people. They didn't deserve what happened to them. Maria watched the deposition with tears streaming down her face. Beside her, I held her hand while Victor sat stone-faced, his jaw tight with rage. That's enough, James Mercer said, pausing the video. We have what we need. With this testimony, we can move forward. Move forward how? Maria asked. Criminal charges against Richard Voss and Margaret Foster for conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, child endangerment, and fraud. The DA will need to review everything, but with Hartley's testimony and the supporting evidence we've gathered, we have a strong case. Maria nodded slowly. I want to be there. When they're arrested, I want them to see my face and know they failed. Patricia Cole smiled grimly. I think that can be arranged. The arrests happened on a cold morning in February. I took the day off work to be with Maria when the news broke. We watched from Victor's penthouse as news helicopters circled Margaret Foster's daughter's house in Garden City, where the elderly woman had been staying. Police led her out in handcuffs, her face shocked and pale. In Connecticut, Richard Voss's arrest was less dramatic but more satisfying. He'd been having breakfast at a country club when federal agents arrived. The news cameras caught him trying to maintain his dignity as he was escorted out past stunned fellow members. Former financial executive and CPS worker arrested in cold case murder and kidnapping, the headline read. By evening, every major news outlet was covering the story. The case had everything: murder, conspiracy, a child stolen and lost for decades, and finally, justice. Maria watched it all with an expression I couldn't quite read, not satisfaction exactly, more like exhaustion mixed with grim determination. It's not over, she said quietly. The trial will take months, maybe years. They'll fight it. They'll try to discredit Hartley's testimony, claim the evidence is too old. Argue technicalities. Let them fight, Victor said. He joined us at the penthouse, the three of us bound together by blood and purpose. We have the truth on our side. And we have something they took away 25 years ago. We have Sarah Ashford, alive and ready to face them. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. We lay in bed in our small Queens apartment. We'd refused to move, despite Victor's offers of better accommodations. This place was ours, a life we built with our own hands. Do you ever wonder who I would have been? Maria asked in the darkness. If none of this had happened? If I'd grown up as Sarah Ashford with parents who loved me and an uncle who would have spoiled me and a normal, stable childhood. I pulled her closer. I think about it. But I also know that person wouldn't be the woman I fell in love with. You are who you are because of everything you survived. And you're incredible. I'm angry, Maria admitted. I'm so angry all the time now. Angry at what they took. Angry at the years I spent thinking I was nobody. That I didn't matter. Angry that my parents died for trying to do the right thing. That's okay. You're allowed to be angry. But I don't want anger to be all I have. I don't want this to consume me. She turned to face me in the dark. Promise me something, Harris. Promise me that no matter what happens with the trial, no matter how this ends, we don't let it destroy who we are. We don't let them take anything else from us. I promise, I said, and meant it. The preliminary hearings began in March. Maria testified, her voice steady as she described her fragmented memories of being taken. The years of confusion in foster care. The identity that had been stolen. She looked directly at Richard Voss and Margaret Foster as she spoke, refusing to let them look away. Dennis Hartley appeared via video link from a hospice facility, his testimony damning and detailed. The defense attorneys tried to discredit him, convicted felon, dying man trying to ease his conscience. No physical evidence to support his claims. But Patricia Cole had been thorough. She'd found the fire inspector's falsified report, traced the money that had changed hands, documented Margaret Foster's unusual involvement in Sarah's case. Piece by piece, the conspiracy was laid bare. In April, Dennis Hartley died, but his deposition remained, a ghost testifying from beyond the grave about sins that could no longer be hidden. The trial was set for June, and Maria Ashford, she'd started using her birth name, though I still called her Maria in private, prepared to face the people who'd destroyed her family and finally, after 25 years, demand they answer for what they'd done. But as spring turned to summer, none of us realized that the trial would reveal one more secret. One final piece of the puzzle that would change everything we thought we knew about that night in 1999. And the real reason Sarah Ashford had been taken. The complete truth was still waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally came to light, it would be stranger and more heartbreaking than any of us had imagined. The trial of Richard Voss and Margaret Foster began on the first Monday in June. In a federal courthouse in Manhattan, I took a leave of absence from my delivery job. Victor had offered to cover our expenses, and for once, Maria had accepted. This was more important than pride. The courtroom was packed. Maria sat in the front row with me on one side and Victor on the other, a united front. Across the aisle, Richard Voss sat with his expensive defense team, looking older than his 73 years, but still carrying himself with the arrogance of someone who'd gotten away with everything for decades. Margaret Foster, 76 and frail-looking, sat separately with her own attorney. The two defendants hadn't spoken to each other since their arrests, a crack in their alliance that the prosecution intended to exploit. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Walsh was sharp and relentless. In her opening statement, she laid out the case methodically. Daniel Ashford's discovery of the Ponzi scheme. His intention to report it. The convenient fire that killed him and his wife. And the daughter who disappeared without a trace. Sarah Ashford didn't die in that fire, Walsh told the jury. She was taken deliberately, systematically, by people who saw a 4-year-old child not as a human being, but as a loose end to be managed. And for 25 years, they thought they'd gotten away with it. But Sarah Ashford is here today, alive and ready to tell you what they did to her. The defense's strategy became clear early. They'd argue that Dennis Hartley's testimony was unreliable, a dying man's delusions motivated by medication and guilt over unrelated crimes. They'd claim the fire had been a tragic accident, that Sarah's disappearance into foster care was a bureaucratic failure, not a kidnapping. They'd say the connections the prosecution had drawn were circumstantial at best. My client is 73 years old, Richard Voss's attorney argued. He served his time for the securities fraud, crimes he deeply regrets. But he is not a murderer. He is not a kidnapper. And the prosecution's case rests entirely on the word of a convicted felon who waited until he was literally on his deathbed to suddenly remember this elaborate conspiracy. But the prosecution had more than Dennis Hartley's testimony. On the third day of trial, Rebecca Walsh called Dr. Michael Gormley, a forensic analyst who'd reviewed the original fire investigation. He testified that the fire's point of origin and burn patterns were consistent with arson, not an electrical fault as the original report claimed. More damning, he identified 3 significant omissions in the original fire inspector's work, omissions that any competent investigator would have noticed. This wasn't incompetence, Dr. Gormley stated. This was deliberate falsification designed to support a predetermined conclusion. The defense tried to argue that mistakes happen, that second-guessing a 25-year-old investigation was unfair. But Walsh was ready. She produced financial records showing a $50,000 deposit into the fire inspector's account 2 weeks after the blaze, money that came from a shell corporation later tied to Richard Voss's network of fraudulent entities. I watched Maria's face as the evidence mounted. She sat perfectly still, her expression composed, but I could see the toll it was taking in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands clenched in her lap. On the 5th day, Maria took the stand. Rebecca Walsh guided her through her testimony gently but thoroughly. Maria described her fragmented memories of that night, being taken by a woman who said her parents were gone. The terror of not understanding what was happening. She spoke about the years in foster care, the constant moves, the feeling of being erased. They told me different stories about where I came from, Maria said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Sometimes I was abandoned. Sometimes I was found wandering. The details always changed. I grew up thinking I was nobody, that I didn't matter enough for anyone to keep track of my story. And when did you learn the truth? Walsh asked. 4 months ago. When my husband discovered my photograph in my uncle's home. When I learned that I wasn't nobody. I was Sarah Ashford, and I had parents who loved me and an uncle who never stopped looking for me. I learned that I mattered. That I'd always mattered. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. They tried to suggest her memories were false, implanted by suggestion and the desire to believe Victor's story. They pointed out inconsistencies in her recollections, dates that didn't quite line up, details that seemed too vague. Isn't it true, Ms. Ashford, Voss's attorney pressed, that you have no actual memory of being taken as you claim? That your earliest clear memories are from age 6 or 7 in foster care? My earliest clear memories are from that age, Maria agreed. But I have fragments from before. Images, feelings, moments. And they match what actually happened. They match the truth. Or they match what you've been told happened. What you want to believe happened because it gives your difficult childhood a narrative that makes you the victim of a conspiracy rather than the victim of ordinary tragedy. I saw Maria's jaw tighten, but her voice remained calm. I am the victim of a conspiracy. The evidence proves that. And nothing you say can change what they did to me. The trial's turning point came in the second week when Margaret Foster's attorney made a calculated move. Seeing the evidence mounting against his client, he approached the prosecution with an offer. Margaret would testify against Richard Voss in exchange for a reduced sentence. The courtroom was electric the day Margaret Foster took the stand. She looked smaller than she had during the arrests, diminished by age and the weight of her crimes. But her memory was sharp, and her testimony was devastating. Richard called me the day after Daniel Ashford contacted the SEC, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was panicking. He said Daniel had enough evidence to destroy everything, to send him to prison for decades. He asked if there was a way to make it stop. And what did you suggest? Rebecca Walsh asked. Nothing. Not at first. But then Richard's brother-in-law, the fire inspector, he suggested making it look like an accident. And Margaret's voice broke. I said if they went through with it, they needed to be careful about the child. That if she survived, she could be a complication later. What did Mr. Voss say to that? He said to take care of it. To make sure she disappeared but stayed alive in case they needed leverage if Daniel had left evidence behind somewhere. Margaret looked at Maria for the first time, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I told myself I was saving you by not letting them kill you too. But I know that's not true. I was just covering for their crime. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Maria sat frozen, staring at the woman who'd stolen her childhood, who'd thrown her into the system and erased her identity. Under cross-examination, Margaret revealed more details. How she'd personally handled Sarah's case file, creating a false history and moving her between facilities to keep her invisible. How she'd checked on her periodically over the years, always from a distance, making sure she stayed lost in the system. Did you ever consider telling the truth? The prosecutor asked. Every day, Margaret said, her voice breaking. But I was afraid. Afraid of prison, afraid of what Richard might do to me or my family if I talked. So I stayed quiet, and I let that little girl suffer for my cowardice. The defense tried to salvage something, suggesting Margaret was lying to save herself, that her testimony was self-serving. But the details matched too perfectly with the evidence, with Maria's fragmented memories, with Dennis Hartley's deposition. Richard Voss's face was ashen as Margaret stepped down. His empire of lies was crumbling, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. The prosecution rested after 2 more days of witnesses, financial experts who traced the money, child welfare workers who confirmed the irregularities in Sarah's case. Even the Rodriguez's former attorney who testified about how unusual it had been for Maria to have so little documentation when they adopted her. The defense put up a fight, but it was clearly a losing battle. They called character witnesses who spoke of Richard's philanthropy in later years, his regret over the Ponzi scheme. They tried to paint Margaret as the mastermind, suggesting she'd acted independently. But the evidence was overwhelming. And when the defense rested without calling either defendant to testify, the jury's verdict seemed inevitable. Closing arguments took 2 days. The defense argued reasonable doubt, the unreliability of testimonies from criminals and distant memories. The prosecution laid out the timeline with devastating precision, every piece of evidence, every connection, every lie that had sustained the conspiracy for 25 years. Sarah Ashford was 4 years old, Rebecca Walsh told the jury in her final statement. 4 years old when these defendants decided her life was worth less than their freedom. They murdered her parents. They took her from her home. They erased her identity and threw her away. And they went on with their lives thinking they'd gotten away with it. But Sarah Ashford didn't disappear. She survived. She grew up. She built a life despite everything they did to her. And she's here today asking you to hold them accountable for what they took from her. For the parents she'll never know. For the childhood that was stolen. For 25 years of lies. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, I held Maria's hand so tightly my fingers went numb. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the 1st degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of kidnapping? Guilty. On the count of child endangerment? Guilty. Every count, every charge. Guilty. Richard Voss sat motionless as the verdicts were read, his face blank. Margaret Foster wept quietly, her shoulders shaking. Maria didn't react visibly. She just sat there, my hand in hers, and breathed. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Richard Voss received 25 years to life, effectively a death sentence for a 73-year-old man. Margaret Foster, because of her cooperation, received 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. Given her age and health, neither would likely die free. But the story didn't end there. After the sentencing, Victor's investigator, Patricia Cole, requested one final meeting. We gathered in Victor's study, the same place where I had first learned the truth about Maria's identity. "There's something we missed," Patricia said, opening her laptop. "Something that didn't come up in the trial because it wasn't directly relevant to the criminal case. But I think you need to know." She pulled up a photograph, an old picture of Daniel Ashford with another man, both young, both in business suits. Daniel kept a safety deposit box that we only found last week. Inside was documentation of the Ponzi scheme, evidence he'd planned to give to the SEC. But there was also this. She handed Maria a letter, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. Maria's hands shook as she unfolded it. "My dearest Sarah," she read aloud, her voice breaking. "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to your mother and me. It means I wasn't able to protect you the way I should have. But know this, you are loved beyond measure. You are strong, brilliant, and kind. Everything your mother and I dreamed you would be. I've discovered things at work that I cannot ignore. Bad people doing bad things that will hurt many innocent families. I have to stop it, even if it puts us in danger. Your Uncle Victor will take care of you if anything happens to us. He loves you as much as we do. Never forget who you are, Sarah. You are an Ashford. You come from a line of people who stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Even when it costs us everything. I hope you never have to read this, but if you do, know that your mother and I will always be with you. Proud of everything you become. All my love forever, Dad." Maria clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing. Victor moved to her side, his own eyes wet. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as 25 years of grief finally poured out. "He knew," Maria whispered. "He knew what might happen, and he did the right thing anyway. He was brave," Victor said quietly, "just like his daughter." In the weeks that followed, Maria worked with victim services to try to locate other children who might have been similarly lost in the system due to Margaret Foster's corruption. They found 3 cases that raised red flags: children with incomplete records, mysterious origins, families that had been searching for them. The truth had opened doors that had been closed for decades. Maria also started working with Victor's foundation, using her experience and her trust fund to reform foster care oversight in New York. She testified before the state legislature, sharing her story and pushing for better tracking systems, more accountability, stronger protections for vulnerable children. I watched her transform. She was still my Maria, still the woman I'd fallen in love with, still the person who hummed while cooking and left notes in my lunch. But she'd also become Sarah Ashford, heir to a legacy of courage and conviction. One evening in early August, we sat on the small balcony of our apartment, watching the sun set over Queens. Maria had been quiet all day, thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Marrying a delivery driver's girlfriend instead of a billionaire's niece." I laughed. "I didn't marry a billionaire's niece. I married you. The money, the family drama, the courtroom theatrics, that's all just stuff that happened. You're still the woman who laughed at my terrible jokes and said yes when I proposed with a ring I saved 6 months to buy." "That was a good ring," Maria said, smiling. "I still wear it, even though I could afford better now. It's not about the price. It's about what it means." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you for standing by me through all of this. For believing me, for supporting me, for being exactly who I needed when my world fell apart. That's what marriage is," I said simply. "Being there when things fall apart." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness fell. In the distance, I could see the skyline of Manhattan, where Victor's penthouse rose among the other towers. Somewhere out there, Richard Voss and Margaret Foster sat in prison cells, paying for their crimes. Somewhere, other families were being reunited with children they'd thought were lost forever. And here on this small balcony in Queens, a delivery driver and the woman who'd been nobody and somebody all at once had found something that all the money and power in the world couldn't buy: a love built on truth, tested by fire, and strong enough to weather any storm. I've been thinking, Maria said after a while, about having kids. If we started a family, I want to tell them about my parents. About Daniel and Catherine, and how they died trying to do the right thing. I want those kids to know where they come from. I think that's beautiful, I said. They'll have an incredible legacy to live up to, and they'll have you to teach them that heroism isn't about money or power. It's about showing up, telling the truth, and loving people even when it's complicated. Maria turned to look at me. You're the hero of this story, Harris. You found that photograph. You pushed for answers. You refused to let it go. You gave me back my family. We gave each other everything that matters, I corrected. And we'll keep doing that through whatever comes next. 6 months later, I stood in Victor's mansion, now a place I visited regularly, no longer intimidated by the wealth or the setting, and watched Maria give a speech to a room full of philanthropists and child welfare advocates. She spoke about her experience, about the gaps in the system that had allowed her to be lost, about the changes that were already being implemented to protect other children. She was confident, articulate, powerful. The woman who'd once been too scared to speak up at work meetings was now commanding the attention of some of the wealthiest and most influential people in New York. When the speech ended, Victor approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. She's remarkable, Victor said, watching Maria network with the crowd. She always was, I replied. The world just didn't know it yet. I'm glad she had you. Through all of this, you were her constant. That matters more than anything I could have given her. I clinked my glass against Victor's. She would have been fine without me, but I'm glad she didn't have to be. That night, back in our apartment, we decided to stay in Queens despite numerous offers to help us move somewhere more appropriate. Maria kicked off her heels and collapsed on the couch with a sigh. Tired? I asked. Exhausted. But good exhausted. She patted the couch beside her. Come here. I sat, and she immediately curled into my side, the way she always did when she needed comfort or connection, or just the reassurance of my presence. I was thinking today about what you asked me once, Maria said, about who I would have been if none of this had happened. If I'd grown up as Sarah Ashford from the beginning. And I think I would have been happy. Privileged, maybe a little spoiled. She smiled. But I wouldn't have been as strong. I wouldn't have learned to survive, to rebuild, to find value in myself without any external validation. I wouldn't have met you. You might have met someone better, I teased. There is no one better. There's just you. The man who saw me when I was invisible. Who loved me when I was nobody. Who stood by me when I discovered I was somebody's daughter and niece and heir. You didn't care about any of that. You just cared about me. I kissed the top of her head. That's all that ever mattered. I learned something through all of this, Maria said softly. Something I want to remember forever. What's that? That justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. It's about making sure that people know what happened. That the victims are seen and heard. That the lies don't get to become the official story. My parents died trying to tell the truth. And in the end, the truth won. It took 25 years, but it won. She sat up, looking at me with those eyes that had stared out from a photograph in a billionaire's study and changed both our lives forever. And I learned that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about the people who show up, who stand beside you when everything falls apart, who believe you even when the truth seems impossible. She took my hand. You're my family, Harris. You always will be. And you're mine, I said. Through everything. Forever. We sat together in our small apartment, surrounded by the life we'd built with our own hands. Outside, the city hummed with millions of other stories, tragedies and triumphs, secrets and revelations, justice delayed but never denied. But inside, there was only truth. Only love. Only the quiet certainty that we'd face the worst and come through stronger together. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming more than what those who wronged you ever imagined possible. It's taking what they meant to destroy and turning it into something beautiful. Something true. Something that matters. Sarah Ashford had been taken. Maria Rodriguez had been lost. But the woman who emerged from those ashes was stronger than either name alone. She was herself, fully realized, finally free. And that was a kind of justice no verdict could ever match. 1 year after the trial, Maria received a call from Patricia Cole. The former FBI agent's voice was tense, urgent. "We found something else in the safety deposit box," she said. "Something we missed the first time. Can you and Harris come to Victor's office today?" 2 hours later, we sat in Victor's private conference room. Patricia placed a small USB drive on the table. "This was hidden in a false bottom of the box," she explained. "It contains financial records that Daniel Ashford compiled before his death. Records that go far beyond Richard Voss's Ponzi scheme." Victor leaned forward. "What kind of records?" "Evidence of a much larger conspiracy. Voss wasn't just stealing from his clients. He was laundering money for some very dangerous people, organized crime, corrupt politicians, foreign interests. Daniel discovered all of it." Maria's face paled. "And that's why they killed him? Not just to cover up the Ponzi scheme?" Patricia nodded grimly. "The Ponzi scheme was the tip of the iceberg. Your father stumbled onto something much bigger, much more dangerous. And these records name names. Powerful people who are still out there, still operating. What does this mean for us?" I asked, instinctively reaching for Maria's hand. "It means we have a choice," Victor said, his expression grave. "We can turn this over to the FBI and let them handle it. Or we can walk away. Voss and Foster are already in prison. We've gotten justice for Daniel and Catherine." Maria stared at the USB drive, her face a complex mix of emotions. "What would happen if we turned this over? Best case? More prosecutions. Worst case? These people find out where the evidence came from and who has it now." Patricia's implication was clear. "You think they'd come after Maria?" I asked, my throat tight. "I think they'd consider her a loose end. Just like they did 25 years ago." The room fell silent. After everything we'd been through, after finally finding peace and building a new life, we were facing another threat. Another decision that could upend everything. "What would my father do?" Maria asked quietly, looking at Victor. Victor's eyes softened. "You know what he would do. It's in his letter. It's in your DNA. Ashfords stand up for what's right, even when it costs them everything." Maria nodded slowly, then looked at me. "Harris." I knew what she was asking. Was I willing to risk our hard-won peace? Our safety? Our future? For a principle, for justice, for people we'd never met, for a fight that wasn't technically ours anymore? "Whatever you decide," I said, squeezing her hand. "I'm with you. Always." Maria took a deep breath and turned to Patricia. "We'll do it. But we do it smart this time. No one else gets hurt because of this information." Patricia outlined a plan. The evidence would be copied and distributed to multiple law enforcement agencies simultaneously, along with major news outlets. The source would remain anonymous. Maria and I would temporarily relocate, a vacation, that would keep us away from New York during the initial fallout. "And what about after?" I asked. "If these people are as dangerous as you say, they won't just give up." "That's where I come in," Victor said. "I have resources, connections. I can make sure you're protected. Both of you." 2 weeks later, Maria and I watched from a private villa in the south of France as the news broke worldwide. "Massive financial conspiracy exposed," the headlines declared. Dozens of high-profile arrests. The evidence Daniel Ashford had gathered a quarter-century earlier was finally doing what he'd intended, exposing corruption, bringing criminals to justice, protecting innocent people from being victimized. Victor called daily with updates. The investigation was expanding. More arrests were being made. The authorities had implemented security protocols to protect the source of the information. "When can we come home?" Maria asked during one call, her voice betraying her homesickness despite the luxury surrounding us. "Soon," Victor promised. "The most dangerous players have been taken into custody. The rest are too busy saving themselves to worry about where the evidence came from." A month into our vacation, we received unexpected visitors. Patricia Cole arrived with a distinguished-looking man she introduced as Director Harmon of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "Mrs. Gormley," he said, using Maria's married name out of respect. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done. The evidence your father preserved has helped us dismantle one of the most extensive financial criminal networks we've ever encountered." "My father did the work," Maria said modestly. He's the one who deserves the credit. And he's getting it, Director Harmon assured her. The Justice Department is posthumously recognizing Daniel Ashford's contribution to this case. But you and your husband took considerable risk to bring this evidence forward. That courage deserves acknowledgement too. He handed Maria an official-looking envelope. Inside was a letter of commendation from the Attorney General of the United States, along with something else, a small medal in a velvet box. This belonged to your father, Director Harmon explained. He received it for his service as a financial consultant to the Treasury Department early in his career. We found it in the government archives and thought you should have it. Maria's hands trembled as she held the medal. Another piece of her father returned to her. Another connection to the man she'd lost. Is it safe for us to go home now? I asked. Director Harmon nodded. We believe so. The major players are in custody. The rest are cooperating to save themselves. But we'd still recommend caution. Ms. Cole has arranged for security measures at your residence, just as a precaution. 2 days later, we returned to our apartment in Queens. It felt strange after the luxury of the French villa, but it was home, our home, and that meant everything. Victor had indeed arranged security, subtle but thorough. New locks, a security system, plainclothes protection for the first few weeks. But as summer turned to fall with no incidents, no threats, life began to return to normal. I went back to my delivery job, though now it was by choice rather than necessity. Maria divided her time between Victor's foundation and her own newly established nonprofit, dedicated to helping children in the foster system maintain connections to their identities and origins. On a crisp October evening, almost 2 years after I'd first seen that photograph in Victor's study, Maria and I hosted a small gathering in our apartment. Victor was there, of course, along with Patricia Cole, James Mercer, and a few close friends who'd supported us through everything. I have an announcement, Maria said, raising her glass. 2, actually. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a joy I hadn't seen in months. First, the Sarah Ashford Foundation has just received approval for our pilot program. Starting next month, we'll be implementing new protocols in 5 states to ensure that children in foster care have their identities and histories properly documented and preserved. Everyone applauded. It was the culmination of months of work, Maria's way of ensuring that what happened to her couldn't happen to other children. And second, she continued, her voice softening as she reached for my hand, Harris and I are expecting. I'm pregnant. The room erupted in congratulations. Victor embraced us both, tears in his eyes at the prospect of a new generation of Ashfords. Patricia and James offered their well wishes. Our friends celebrated with us, their joy genuine and warm. Later that night, after everyone had gone and we were alone again, Maria stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Are you happy? I asked, wrapping my arms around her from behind, my hands resting gently on her still flat stomach. More than I ever thought possible, she said, leaning back against me. I have a family, the baby, Victor. I have a purpose. I have the truth about who I am and where I come from. What more could I want? A bigger apartment, maybe? I suggested with a smile. This place is going to feel pretty small with a baby. Maria laughed. I was thinking about that. What if we found something in between? Not this apartment, but not Victor's mansion either. Something that's just ours, but with a little more space. A yard, maybe. I'd like that, I said. Somewhere our child can grow up knowing both sides of their heritage, the working-class Brooklyn dry cleaner's grandson and the billionaire's great-niece. With parents who love them more than anything, Maria added. That's the most important part. 6 months later, we moved into a modest house in a quiet neighborhood in Queens. Close enough to the city for my work and Maria's foundation, but with a small yard and an extra bedroom for the baby. Victor had offered to buy us something grander, but we'd insisted on doing this ourselves. The house was within our means thanks to Maria's trust fund, but not ostentatious. It was a home, not a statement. On a warm spring day, with the cherry trees blooming in our new backyard, Maria gave birth to a daughter. We named her Catherine after Maria's mother, with the middle name Eliza after my grandmother. Catherine Eliza Gormley, a name that honored both sides of her family history. Victor arrived at the hospital with an armful of flowers and tears in his eyes. When he held Catherine for the first time, his hands trembling slightly, I saw the cycle of loss and recovery come full circle. What had been taken was not returned. Nothing could bring back Daniel and Catherine Ashford or the childhood their daughter should have had. But something new had been created from that loss. Something hopeful. Something true. As Catherine grew, so did our extended family. Victor became a doting great-uncle. Patricia and James remained close friends and advisors. The Sarah Ashford Foundation expanded its work to more states, helping more children maintain connections to their histories and identities. On Catherine's 3rd birthday, we held a party in our backyard. As I watched her play with her friends, her laughter bright in the summer air, Maria came to stand beside me. "I found something yesterday," she said, handing me a small, wrapped package. "Open it." Inside was a silver picture frame, elegant but not ostentatious. It held a photograph of the 3 of us, Maria, Catherine, and me, taken at the beach the previous summer. "I thought we could put it on the mantel," Maria said, "next to the one of my parents." I recognized the frame immediately. It was the same design as the one that had sat on Victor Ashford's desk that fateful day. The one that had started our journey. "It's perfect," I said, my throat tight with emotion. That evening, after Catherine was asleep, Maria and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance in our modest yard. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Maria asked. "If you hadn't taken that delivery route that day? If you hadn't noticed the photograph?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I think about all we would have missed. The truth. Justice for your parents. The foundation. Victor. Even with all the pain and fear and uncertainty, I wouldn't change a thing." Maria rested her head on my shoulder. "Neither would I. It's strange to think that the worst thing that ever happened to me, being taken, having my identity erased, eventually led to the best things in my life. Finding out who I really am. Meeting you. Having Catherine. Life is like that sometimes," I said. "The worst moments can lead to the best if you're brave enough to keep going." "Like my father," Maria said softly. "Standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." "Exactly like your father," I agreed. "And exactly like you." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of our neighborhood. Not the exclusive enclave where Victor lived, not the struggling area where I'd grown up, but somewhere in between. A place of our own choosing, where our daughter could grow up knowing both sides of her heritage and the remarkable story of how her family came to be. The photograph that had once caused me such pain and confusion now sat proudly on our mantel, a reminder not of secrets and lies, but of truth and reconciliation. A reminder that sometimes the most unexpected discoveries can lead to the most beautiful destinations. And as for me, the delivery driver who once feared he was losing his wife to a billionaire? I had found something far more valuable than any fortune, a family built on honesty, courage, and love. A family that had faced the darkest truths and emerged stronger. A family that would pass down not just wealth or status, but the legacy of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. That, I knew, was the true inheritance that Catherine would receive. And it was worth more than all the billions in the world. 5 years later. The playground was busy with children's laughter on this bright Saturday morning. I sat on a bench, watching 8-year-old Catherine push her 3-year-old brother Daniel on the swing. My son's giggles carried across the park, making me smile despite the weight of the day ahead. "They're growing so fast," Maria said, settling beside me with 2 coffee cups. She handed me one, her wedding ring catching the sunlight, the same modest ring I'd given her all those years ago, though she now wore it alongside the Ashford family ring Victor had given her on her 30th birthday. "Too fast," I agreed, taking a sip. "Catherine's already talking about what college she wants to attend." "Stanford, like her grandfather," Maria said with a soft smile. "Though Victor is still lobbying for Harvard." We watched our children play, these beautiful combinations of our shared DNA and the legacy of families once separated by tragedy, now united through them. Catherine had Maria's eyes and my stubborn chin. Daniel had my height and Maria's quick mind. Both had inherited a sense of justice that seemed bone deep. "Are you ready for today?" I asked gently. Maria nodded, her expression solemn but composed. As ready as I'll ever be. Today marked the 10th anniversary of the trial that had brought Richard Voss and Margaret Foster to justice. The Sarah Ashford Foundation was hosting a gala to raise funds for their expanded programs, now operating in 27 states. The event would also unveil a memorial dedicated to victims of identity theft and displacement in the foster care system. Victor called this morning, Maria said. The Attorney General confirmed she'll be attending. And 3 of the children we helped reunite with their families last year will be speaking. The Foundation's work had expanded far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. What began as Maria's personal mission had grown into a nationally recognized organization that had helped identify and correct dozens of cases similar to hers, children whose identities had been altered or obscured, families separated by bureaucratic failures or deliberate manipulation. I'm proud of you, I said, taking her hand. Your parents would be too. A shadow crossed Maria's face, not of pain, but of thoughtful remembrance. I was thinking about my mother this morning, trying to imagine what she'd think of all this. Of Catherine and Daniel. Of the Foundation. She'd think her daughter is extraordinary, I said simply. Maria squeezed my hand. We should head back soon. I still need to review my speech, and the children need to change for the gala. As we gathered our things and called the children, my phone buzzed with a text from Victor. News just broke. Thought you should know before the event. Attached was a news alert. Richard Voss found dead in prison cell. Apparent suicide. I showed Maria the message, watching her face carefully. Her expression remained steady, though her eyes reflected complex emotions. Are you okay? I asked quietly. Yes, she said after a moment. I don't feel happiness or satisfaction. Just closure, maybe. His choices destroyed so many lives, including his own in the end. Mom, can Emma come to the gala tonight? Catherine asked, running up to us, oblivious to the news we'd just received. Not tonight, sweetheart, Maria answered, smoothly tucking away her phone. But she can come over tomorrow for your birthday party. Catherine accepted this with a nod, taking her little brother's hand as we walked toward the car. I marveled, not for the first time, at Maria's ability to compartmentalize, to be fully present for our children while processing news that would have once devastated her. That evening, the grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel glittered with lights and influential guests. The Sarah Ashford Foundation Gala had become one of the premier charity events in New York, drawing support from across the political and social spectrum. Child welfare reform, it turned out, was one of the few causes everyone could agree on. Victor, distinguished in his tuxedo despite now being in his 70s, worked the room with practiced ease. He'd become the Foundation's most vocal advocate, leveraging his business connections to secure funding and legislative support. The once solitary billionaire had found new purpose as a great-uncle and philanthropist. Patricia Cole, now the Foundation's security director, monitored the room with professional vigilance. James Mercer, who had left his private practice to become the Foundation's legal counsel, chatted with a group of judges about upcoming policy changes. And in the center of it all stood Maria, confident, poised, radiant in a simple emerald gown that matched her eyes. No one looking at her would guess that this elegant woman had once been a lost child, her identity erased, her history stolen. No one would imagine that the founder of this prestigious foundation had once been a quiet bookkeeper in Queens, married to a delivery driver. But I knew. I knew every step of her journey, every struggle, every triumph. I had watched her reclaim her name, her history, her power. I had held her through nightmares and celebrated her victories. I had seen her transform pain into purpose. As the time approached for her speech, Maria found me in the crowd, her eyes seeking mine as they always did in important moments. I gave her a reassuring nod, and she smiled, that private smile that, even after all these years, still made my heart skip. She took the stage to enthusiastic applause, waiting for the room to quiet before speaking. 10 years ago, she began, her voice clear and strong. I learned that my entire life had been built on a lie. I discovered that I wasn't Maria Rodriguez, a girl abandoned by unknown parents. I was Sarah Ashford, daughter of Daniel and Catherine Ashford, who died trying to expose corruption and fraud. The room was silent, captivated by her story, though many had heard it before. That discovery could have destroyed me. Instead, it saved me. It gave me back my history, my identity, my family. Her eyes found Victor in the crowd, then moved to where Catherine and Daniel sat with Patricia. And it showed me how many other children might be out there lost, disconnected from their true identities, their histories erased or altered. She gestured to a group of young people seated at a front table. Tonight, we celebrate not just the work of the foundation, but the courage of these individuals who have reclaimed their own stories. Children separated from their families through bureaucratic failures, identity theft, or deliberate manipulation. Families reunited after years or decades apart. Maria paused, and I knew she was thinking of the news about Richard Voss. She had chosen not to mention it, focusing instead on healing rather than retribution. The memorial we unveil tonight honors those who never found their way home, those whose stories remain untold, those still searching. It stands as a promise that we will continue this work until every child knows where they come from, who they are, and that they matter. The rest of her speech detailed the foundation's accomplishments and future goals. The audience responded with generous donations and commitments of support. But it was the quiet moments afterward that meant the most. The young woman who hugged Maria and whispered, "Thank you for finding my grandmother." The elderly couple who had finally located their grandson after 15 years. The social workers implementing the foundation's new identity protection protocols. Later that night, after the children were asleep and we had changed out of our formal wear, Maria and I sat in our backyard. The memorial gala had been a success beyond expectations, raising enough funds to expand the foundation's work to 5 more states. "I've been thinking about changing my name," Maria said suddenly. I looked at her surprised. "To Ashford." She shook her head. "No. To keep Gormley, but legally add Ashford as a middle name. Sarah Ashford Gormley." "Why no?" I asked. For years, she had used Sarah Ashford professionally, but remained Maria Gormley legally. "Because I'm finally ready to be both," she said simply. "I'm Sarah Ashford, daughter of Daniel and Catherine, niece of Victor. But I'm also Maria, the woman who survived foster care, who built a life from nothing, who married you. Both are real. Both are me." I understood then what this meant. Not a rejection of either identity, but an integration. A wholeness that acknowledged all parts of her journey. "I think that's perfect," I said. Maria leaned against me, her head on my shoulder as we looked up at the stars. When I was little, in one of the foster homes, I used to make wishes on stars. I wished for parents, for a real home, for someone to love me. "And now?" I asked. "Now I wish for other children to find what I've found. To know their histories, their families. To have what Catherine and Daniel have, a sense of belonging, of being rooted in something real." I thought about our children, asleep upstairs in rooms decorated with both family photos, the Ashfords and the Gormleys, the wealthy and the working class, all part of their heritage. They would grow up knowing exactly who they were and where they came from. They would never experience the confusion and loss that Maria had endured. "We should take them to the lighthouse next weekend," I suggested. Victor's summer home on the coast had become a favorite family retreat. Catherine's been asking to learn to sail, and Daniel loves the tide pools. "I'd like that," Maria said. Victor mentioned he found some old home movies he wants to show me. From when I was 3 or 4. These discoveries still happened occasionally, Victor unearthing some artifact from Maria's early childhood, another piece of her history restored. Each one was precious, another thread reconnecting her to the family she'd lost. As we sat there under the stars, I reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought us here. A random delivery route. A photograph in a silver frame. A moment of suspicion that led not to betrayal but to truth. A family lost and found across decades. "Do you know what today is?" Maria asked softly. "Besides the gala anniversary?" I thought for a moment, then realized. "The day I delivered that package to Victor's house. The day I saw your photograph." She nodded. 12 years ago today. If you hadn't taken that route, if you hadn't noticed that photo, I would have noticed, I said with certainty. Even in a house full of priceless art and antiques, I would have seen you. I would always find you. Maria smiled, the same smile that had captured my heart all those years ago, whether she was Maria Rodriguez or Sarah Ashford or some perfect combination of both. And I would always find my way back to you, she said. No matter what name I used or what history I carried. Some things are just meant to be. As we sat together in the quiet of our backyard, surrounded by the life we'd built and the truth we'd uncovered, I knew she was right. Some connections transcend circumstance, identity, even time itself. Some loves are strong enough to withstand any revelation, any transformation. The photograph that had once caused me such confusion and pain now hung in our living room, alongside images of our children, our wedding, our life together. No longer a mystery or a threat, but a testament to the power of truth and the journey home. Sarah Ashford had been lost, but Maria Gormley had been found. And in finding herself, all of herself, she had created something beautiful from the broken pieces of her past. A foundation that helped others. A family that honored all parts of her history. A life built on truth rather than lies. And I, the delivery driver who had once feared losing everything, had instead gained a world I could never have imagined. Not of wealth or status, though those had come too, but of purpose and belonging. Of being part of a story larger than myself, a story of loss and recovery, of identity reclaimed, of justice served not through vengeance, but through healing. As the stars shone overhead and the woman I loved rested against my shoulder, I felt a profound gratitude for the photograph in the silver frame and for every moment, painful and joyful, that had followed its discovery. Some questions lead to answers we never expected. Some journeys take us places we never imagined. And sometimes, the most extraordinary revelations come from the most ordinary beginnings, like a delivery driver noticing a familiar face in a billionaire's mansion and finding the courage to ask why. The end. What an incredible journey this story has been. From suspicion to revelation to healing and purpose, this tale reminds us that sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our most meaningful transformations. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of truth, justice, and love. What was your favorite part of Maria and Harris's journey? Let me know in the comments below.